The message came through at 0400 hours, right on your screen, and marked eyes only. If this one hit the mark, Commander Takeshi Yamada's hands trembled as he decoded the final line. All personnel expendable. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us. He looked across the flight deck of the carrier Shōkaku, watching young pilots barely old enough to shave preparing their Zeros for what they believed was another routine patrol. They had no idea this would be their last sunrise. Neither did the 2,847 crew members sleeping in the berths below. By sunset, 91% of them would begin a journey they'd never return from. And I was the one who had to keep that secret locked inside my chest, even as I shook their hands and wished them victory. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My name is Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, and I served as communications officer aboard the Imperial Japanese Navy carrier Shōkaku from 1942 until the day everything changed. What I'm about to tell you has been classified for 80 years, buried in archives that most historians will never access. But I'm 98 years old now, and the weight of these secrets has crushed my soul for long enough. The families of those men deserve to know the truth about why their sons, brothers, and fathers never came home. It started in March 1944. The war wasn't going as Tokyo had promised. We'd lost Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Solomon Islands. American forces were island-hopping closer to the homeland with every passing month. But aboard the Shōkaku, morale remained surprisingly high. Captain Jiro Nakamura ran a tight ship, and our crew believed in the cause. We were samurai of the sea, they told us. Honor above all else. I remember the morning everything changed with perfect clarity. The sky was that particular shade of pink that only exists over the Pacific at dawn. I'd been on night duty in the communications room, monitoring encrypted transmissions from Combined Fleet Headquarters in Tokyo. Most messages were routine, position reports, weather updates, supply requisitions. Then, at 0347 hours, a priority transmission began coming through on the command frequency. The encryption was different. Triple-layered, using a code system I'd only seen twice before, both times for orders of extraordinary sensitivity. My fingers worked the decryption machine methodically, but my heart rate accelerated with each passing minute. Whatever this message contained, it came from the highest levels of command. When the final plaintext appeared on my notepad, I read it 3 times to make sure I hadn't made an error. Then I read it a 4th time, hoping desperately that I had. But the words remained unchanged, cold and absolute as a death sentence typed on official Imperial Navy letterhead. Operation Tengo Modification Authenticated. All carrier battle groups reassigned to diversionary action. Primary objective, draw American fleet away from homeland approaches. Secondary objective, inflict maximum casualties before vessel loss. Tertiary directive, no vessel to return to port. All personnel expendable in service to Emperor. Survivor rescue operations suspended indefinitely. Fuel allocations reduced to one-way mission parameters. I sat frozen in my chair, the message trembling in my hands. The implications were staggering, horrifying, and perfectly clear. High Command had decided that Japan's remaining carrier fleet, including the Shōkaku and her 3,200 crew members, would be sacrificed in a massive diversionary operation. We were being sent on a one-way mission, though no one except senior command staff would know until it was too late to turn back. The fuel allocation detail was particularly cruel. By providing only enough fuel for outbound transit, Tokyo ensured that even if we somehow survived the battle, we couldn't return home. We'd drift helplessly until enemy forces found us or the ocean claimed us. It was a death sentence disguised as a battle plan. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. Protocol demanded I deliver this message immediately to Captain Nakamura. But something inside me rebelled against that simple chain of command. These weren't just orders, this was a murder warrant for nearly everyone I'd served alongside for 2 years. Young pilots like Kenji Sato, who showed me photographs of his infant daughter every morning. Engine room supervisor Daichi Kobayashi, who shared his wife's homemade rice cakes during night watches. Navigator Riku Watanabe, who taught me constellation navigation during our quiet moments on deck. I climbed the ladder to the bridge deck slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The morning watch was changing, sailors moving efficiently through their routines. They laughed quietly, careful not to disturb sleeping comrades. They had no idea they were living their final hours of normalcy. Captain Nakamura was reviewing charts when I entered his quarters. He looked up with his characteristic sharp gaze, immediately sensing something wrong from my expression. "Lieutenant Tanaka. You look like you've seen a ghost." "Sir, priority transmission from Combined Fleet Headquarters." I handed him the decoded message, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. "Triple encryption. Command frequency." He read in silence, his weathered face revealing nothing. Years of command had taught him to control every muscle, every reaction. But I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, and his knuckles whitened as his grip on the paper intensified. When he finally looked up, his eyes carried a weight I'd never seen before. "You decoded this yourself?" "Yes, sir. No one else has seen it." "Good." He walked to his small porthole, staring out at the dawn-lit ocean. "This stays between us until I receive confirmation orders. You will speak of this to no one. Understood?" "Understood, sir." I hesitated, then asked the question burning in my mind. "Captain, they're sending us to die. All of us. Shouldn't the crew be told?" Nakamura turned slowly, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw conflict in his eyes. Not doubt, never doubt, but the terrible burden of knowledge. "Lieutenant, do you know what happens if 3,200 men learn they're on a suicide mission while still in port?" I remained silent. Mutiny. Desertion. The complete collapse of military discipline. And then, when Tokyo sends military police to restore order, executions. Mass executions. Not just the deserters, but their families. Their parents. Their children. He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "At least this way, they die as warriors. With honor. Their families receive pensions and respect. The alternative is disgrace for generations." The logic was sound, ruthless, and absolutely horrifying. "So we say nothing. We say nothing." He returned to his desk, already composing himself for the day's duties. "Return to your station, Lieutenant. Destroy all traces of that transmission. And pray to whatever gods still listen that we're wrong about what's coming." The next 72 hours passed in surreal normalcy. I performed my duties mechanically, monitoring communications, filing reports, maintaining equipment. But every interaction felt weighted with terrible knowledge. When Kenji Sato showed me new photographs of his daughter taking her first steps, I had to force enthusiasm past the lump in my throat. When Daichi Kobayashi invited me to share sake after our shift, celebrating his promotion to chief engineer, I had to pretend tomorrow wasn't already written in blood. Captain Nakamura moved through the ship like a man carved from stone. He conducted inspections, reviewed battle drills, praised efficient work, exactly as he'd always done. But I caught him sometimes, late at night on the bridge, staring at the crew roster with an expression that would haunt me for the rest of my life. He was memorizing names. Faces. Making sure he remembered every soul under his command before he led them to oblivion. On the third day, confirmation orders arrived. Operation Tengo would commence at 0600 hours on April 6, 1945. Our carrier battle group, including Shōkaku, Zuikaku, and 4 escort vessels, would sail toward the Philippine Sea with one mission: draw the American fleet away from Okinawa by presenting an irresistible target. We were bait. Expensive, well-trained, thoroughly expendable bait. The briefing came at 1400 hours. All senior officers assembled in the wardroom while I stood at the communications station, my role to provide real-time intelligence updates during the presentation. In reality, I was there to prevent any officer from questioning the orders too loudly where enlisted men might hear. Commander Hideaki Tanaka, our executive officer, presented the operation with professional precision. Maps showed our route. Diagrams illustrated expected American response patterns. Casualty projections were presented clinically, though notably, survival rates were never mentioned. Because there wouldn't be any. Fuel allocations? Lieutenant Commander Yoshi Fujimoto, our engineering chief, asked the question I'd been dreading. Captain Nakamura answered without hesitation. Sufficient for operational requirements. Fujimoto's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd been calculating fuel consumption for 20 years. He knew the numbers didn't make sense for a round-trip mission. But he also understood what wasn't being said. His jaw tightened, but he nodded acceptance. After the briefing, officers filed out in uncomfortable silence. Several exchanged knowing glances. They'd done the math. They understood what operational requirements meant. But not one spoke the truth aloud. To do so would be to acknowledge cowardice, to dishonor the emperor, to shame their families. So they remained silent, choosing death over disgrace. That night, I sat in the communications room, listening to traffic from other vessels in our battle group. The carrier Shōkaku transmitted routine status reports. Destroyers Yukikes and Isokes confirmed readiness. Everyone maintaining the fiction that we were preparing for a normal combat operation, not an orchestrated sacrifice. I thought about writing a letter home. Explaining everything to my parents. But what could I say? Dear mother and father, I'm about to die in a pointless diversionary operation, but please don't tell anyone because it would dishonor my memory. Instead, I wrote nothing. Silence seemed more honest than lies. April 6, 1945, arrived with deceptive beauty. Clear skies, calm seas, the kind of morning that made you believe the world was fundamentally good. I watched the sunrise from the communications deck, knowing it might be the last one I'd ever see. Around me, the carrier hummed with activity as 3,200 men prepared for what most believed was just another mission. The engine rooms roared to life at 0530 hours. Deep in the belly of the ship, Daichi Kobayashi and his team coaxed the massive turbines to full power, unaware they were burning through fuel that would never be replaced. On the flight deck, pilots performed pre-flight checks on their Zeros with meticulous care. Kenji Sato kissed the photograph of his daughter before tucking it into his flight suit pocket, a ritual he performed before every mission. At exactly 0600 hours, Captain Nakamura gave the order. All ahead full. Set course 270. The Shōkaku turned westward, cutting through Pacific waters with the grace of a predator. Behind us, the Shōkaku and our escort destroyers fell into formation. From above, we must have looked magnificent, Japan's remaining naval power moving with purpose and precision. No one watching could have guessed we were sailing toward our own funeral. I remained at my station, monitoring communications traffic. American radio intercepts suggested they'd detected our movement within hours. Perfect. We were supposed to be detected. The entire operation depended on drawing American carrier groups away from Okinawa, where Japanese forces were making their desperate last stand. By noon, the trap was set. American reconnaissance planes shadowed us from a distance, reporting our position every 30 minutes. In the wardroom, senior officers tracked their movements on charts, calculating when the American strike would come. Not if. When. They'll hit us tomorrow morning, predicted Commander Hiroshi Tanaka, studying the patterns. Dawn attack, maximum visibility for their pilots. Captain Nakamura nodded slowly. Then we have one more night. Make sure the men get hot meals and rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Difficult. The understatement of the century. Tomorrow, American carrier aircraft would descend on us in overwhelming numbers. Our pilots would launch to defend the ship, outnumbered 5-1. Our anti-aircraft guns would fire until their barrels melted. And when the explosions finally stopped, the Shōkaku would be sinking, taking most of her crew to the bottom of the Pacific. That evening, I walked the ship one final time. In the galley, cooks prepared rice and fish for dinner, joking about what they'd eat when we returned to port. In the engine rooms, Mechanics performed maintenance on equipment that wouldn't survive another 48 hours. In the crew quarters, young sailors wrote letters home, describing their adventures and promising to visit soon. Every conversation was a knife in my heart. These men trusted their commanders. They believed in their mission. They had faith that their sacrifice, if it came to that, would serve a greater purpose. But I knew the truth. We weren't heroes sailing toward glory. We were pawns being deliberately sacrificed in a game that was already lost. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in my bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of the ship. Metal creaking. Water rushing past the hull. Distant voices of night watch crews. Every sound felt precious, finite, like grains of sand slipping through an hourglass I couldn't stop. Around 0200 hours, I gave up trying to rest. I climbed to the deck, breathing in the salt air and staring at stars that had guided sailors for millennia. Would anyone remember us? Would history record that we'd been sent here deliberately, sacrificed by men in Tokyo who'd never have to answer for their decisions? Can't sleep either? The voice startled me. Captain Nakamura stood near the railing, his face barely visible in the darkness. No, sir. We stood in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke again. My father was a fisherman. Simple man, honest work. He wanted me to take over his boat. A bitter laugh. I chose the Navy instead. Thought I was pursuing something noble. Honor. Service. Glory. You've served honorably, sir. Have I? He turned to face me, and in the starlight I could see tears on his weathered cheeks. I'm leading 3,200 men to their deaths, Lieutenant. I know the orders are criminal. I know this operation serves no strategic purpose. And I'm doing it anyway because refusing would bring shame to my family. The raw honesty shocked me. Sir, you're following orders. The shame belongs to those who gave them. Does it? He gripped the railing tightly. Or am I just a coward hiding behind duty? A real leader would refuse. Would expose this madness. Would save his men instead of sacrificing them for political theater. A real leader would be executed for treason, and his men would be sent anyway under a different commander, I replied quietly. At least this way, you're here with them. Sharing their fate. Nakamura was silent for a long moment. When this is over, Lieutenant, if you survive somehow. I won't survive, sir. We both know that. If you survive, he continued firmly, tell the truth. Tell everyone what really happened here. Don't let them turn this into some glorious last stand. These men deserve better than lies. Before I could respond, the alarm bells shattered the night silence. Every sailor on the ship jolted awake, training overriding confusion as they rushed to battle stations. I sprinted toward the communications room while Captain Nakamura headed for the bridge. Radar contact, the watch officer's voice crackled over the intercom. Multiple bogies inbound, bearing 090. Distance 60 kilometers and closing fast. They were early. The Americans had launched a pre-dawn strike, attacking while we were most vulnerable. Brilliant tactics. Absolutely devastating timing. I reached my station as the first wave appeared on radar. 70 aircraft. Then the second wave. 90 more. Then a third. The numbers kept climbing until I stopped counting. We had perhaps 40 operational zeros. The mathematics of survival had just become impossible. Above deck, pilots scrambled to their aircraft. Engine crews worked frantically to launch fighters before the enemy arrived. Anti-aircraft batteries swiveled toward the incoming threat. And throughout the ship, men who'd been sleeping peacefully 5 minutes ago now faced the reality that they'd probably never see another sunrise. The first Zeros launched at 0441 hours, their engines screaming as they clawed for altitude. Kenji Sato was among the first airborne, climbing toward an enemy force that outnumbered him catastrophically. Through the communications headset, I heard the pilot chatter, calm, professional, and heartbreaking in its normalcy. Tiger 3 to Tiger Leader, I have visual contact. Hellcats at Angels 12. Copy, Tiger 3. All units, engage at will. The sky erupted with violence at 0453 hours. Tracer rounds drew luminous lines through the pre-dawn darkness. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers as aircraft disintegrated mid-air. The Americans came in waves, coordinated and overwhelming, their tactics honed by 3 years of Pacific combat. Our anti-aircraft batteries opened fire simultaneously, creating a wall of flak that momentarily disrupted the American formation. But there were too many of them, attacking from too many directions. For every bomber we shot down, 3 more broke through our defensive screen. The first bomb struck the Shōkaku at 0507 hours. A 1,000-pound explosive that penetrated the flight deck and detonated in the hangar bay below. The explosion tore through 3 decks, killing everyone in the immediate area instantly. Damage control teams rushed toward the fire, but before they arrived, 2 more bombs struck in rapid succession. I felt each impact through my feet, the entire carrier shuddering like a wounded animal. Smoke began pouring through ventilation systems. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency lighting that cast everything in hellish red shadows. Communications, this is Bridge. Damage report. Captain Nakamura's voice remained steady despite the chaos. Multiple hits to flight deck and hangar bay, sir. Fires spreading. Casualty estimates, the next explosion cut off my report. This one struck near the bridge itself, close enough that I felt the heat wave through the bulkhead. In the sky above, our outnumbered pilots fought with desperate courage. Kenji Sato took down 2 American fighters before a Hellcat caught him from behind. I heard his final transmission, Tiger 3 going down. Tell my daughter then static. The Shōkaku was burning too. Through the smoke, I could see fires consuming her flight deck. One of our escort destroyers, the Isokais, took a torpedo and began listing heavily to port. We weren't just losing the battle. We were being systematically destroyed. At 0534 hours, a torpedo from an American Avenger struck the Shōkaku below the waterline. The explosion buckled steel plates, and seawater began flooding the lower decks. Engineering reported the port engine was dead. We were slowing, making ourselves an even easier target. All hands, prepare to abandon ship, Captain Nakamura's voice came over the intercom, finally admitting what everyone already knew. We were finished. But even as he gave the order, I knew the terrible truth. We had no rescue ships standing by. No destroyers waiting to pick up survivors. The Americans wouldn't stop to collect enemy sailors from the water. We'd been sent here to die, and now that fate was being fulfilled exactly as Tokyo had planned. The order to abandon ship came too late for most. By the time Captain Nakamura's voice crackled through the damaged intercom system, half the crew was already trapped below decks. Watertight doors had sealed automatically when the torpedo struck, a safety measure designed to save the ship that instead became a tomb for hundreds of men. I helped evacuate the communications room, guiding 3 junior operators toward the nearest ladder. The ship listed heavily to starboard now, making every step treacherous. Water sloshed through corridors that had been dry minutes before. Emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging us into darkness broken only by distant fires. Move! Keep moving! I shouted, pushing the younger men ahead of me. Behind us, another explosion rocked the carrier. The entire vessel groaned like a dying beast, metal twisting under forces it was never designed to withstand. We reached the main deck at 0547 hours. The scene was apocalyptic. Fires raged across the flight deck. Bodies lay where the bombs had caught them. Survivors stumbled through smoke, many injured, all terrified. The ocean around us was already littered with debris and men who'd jumped or been blown overboard. The Shōkaku was sinking faster than we were. Her bow had lifted completely out of the water, propellers still spinning uselessly as she slid backward into the Pacific. Men poured from her like ants from a disturbed nest, hundreds jumping into the oil-slicked water. The destroyer Isokais had already vanished beneath the waves. "Sir, we need to go." One of my operators grabbed my arm, pointing toward the railing where other sailors were preparing to jump. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Get to the water. Find something that floats. I'll be right behind you. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But he nodded and ran toward the rail with the others. I turned back toward the bridge, climbing against the growing tilt of the deck. If I was going to die here, I needed to die knowing I'd tried to document the truth. The bridge was chaos. Officers shouted orders that couldn't be executed. Wounded men lay against bulkheads, bleeding from shrapnel wounds. Captain Nakamura stood at his station, refusing to leave even as the ship died beneath him. Lieutenant Tanaka. He turned as I entered. You should be in the water. So should you, sir. A captain doesn't abandon his ship. His voice carried no emotion now, just acceptance. But there's no reason for you to stay. Get out while you can. Sir, permission to ask one final question. Granted. Was it worth it? Any of it? Nakamura stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. No. It was murder dressed up as duty. And I'll carry that shame to whatever hell waits for men like me. He pulled a sealed envelope from his uniform jacket. Take this. My confession. Everything I know about the operation, the orders, the fuel calculations. Hide it. Survive if you can. Make sure someone knows what they did to us. I took the envelope, tucking it inside my own jacket. I'll try, sir. Don't try. Survive. That's an order. He turned back to face the burning horizon. Now get off my ship, Lieutenant. That's the last order I'll ever give you. I saluted, though he couldn't see it, and ran back toward the main deck. The Shōkaku was going down fast now. The list had increased to 45 degrees. Men were sliding down the tilted deck, unable to stop themselves from plummeting into the churning water below. At 0603 hours, I jumped. The fall seemed to last forever, long enough for me to think about my parents, my childhood, all the things I'd never do. Then the cold Pacific water swallowed me whole. The water was colder than I'd imagined. The shock of it drove the air from my lungs, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't remember which way was up. Then survival instinct kicked in. I kicked toward the light, breaking the surface, gasping and choking on seawater mixed with fuel oil. Around me, the ocean was a nightmare. Hundreds of men thrashed in the water, many injured, all struggling to stay afloat. Debris from the carrier rained down, pieces of metal, chunks of wood, occasionally bodies of men who'd been blown off the deck. The Shōkaku loomed above us, tilting further with each passing minute, a dying giant preparing to take its final plunge. I grabbed onto a floating piece of deck plating, kicking away from the carrier. Everyone who'd served in the Navy knew the danger. When a ship went down, it created powerful suction that could drag swimmers to the bottom. Already, men too close to the hull were being pulled back toward the sinking vessel despite their desperate attempts to swim away. Over here! Grab on! I shouted to a young sailor flailing nearby. He was maybe 19, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. I pulled him to the makeshift raft, and he clung to it with the desperate strength of terror. At 0619 hours, the Shōkaku made her final dive. The carrier rolled onto her side with a sound like the earth splitting open, metal screaming, compartments imploding, thousands of tons of steel surrendering to the ocean's embrace. Men still trapped inside never had a chance. The ship slid beneath the waves stern first, creating a whirlpool that caught dozens of swimmers who'd thought they were safe. Then she was gone. Just like that. 3,000 tons of steel and the lives of over 2,000 men, swallowed by the Pacific in less than 20 seconds. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the chaos had been. The young sailor beside me began crying. Not loudly, just quiet sobs that his body couldn't contain. I didn't try to comfort him. What comfort could I offer? We were alive for now, but our situation was hopeless. We floated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with no rescue ships coming. The Americans were already withdrawing, their mission accomplished. We'd been left to die slowly instead of quickly. Around us, other survivors clung to debris or each other, forming small clusters in the vast emptiness. I counted perhaps 300 men still visible, though there were probably more scattered across miles of ocean. 300 survivors from a crew of 3,200. The math was devastating. "Lieutenant?" The young sailor's voice was barely audible. "Are they coming to get us?" I could have lied. Should have lied. Instead, I told him the truth. "No. No one's coming." His face crumpled. "My mother. She's waiting for me to come home. She made me promise." "I know." What else could I say? "I'm sorry." The day passed with agonizing slowness. The sun climbed higher, turning the water from cold to warm to burning hot. Men began succumbing to injuries, dehydration, shock. Bodies drifted away on the current, one by one, until the living couldn't tell how many remained. By nightfall, the young sailor beside me had stopped responding. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, his grip on the deck plating slack. I checked for a pulse and found none. Gently, I released his body to the ocean. He deserved better than to drift forever as a floating corpse. That night, I counted 37 survivors within visual range. By morning, there were 19. The ocean was claiming us methodically, patiently, exactly as Tokyo had planned when they sent us here with one-way fuel and no rescue contingency. I floated in the Pacific for 4 days. For days watching men die around me, for days without food or fresh water, for days wondering if each breath would be my last. The sun burned my skin. Salt water cracked my lips. Hallucinations came and went. I saw rescue ships that weren't there, heard voices of dead crew members calling my name, felt my mother's hand on my forehead like I was a child again. On the morning of the 5th day, consciousness became difficult to maintain. I knew I was dying. Part of me welcomed it. The struggle was so exhausting, and surrender seemed peaceful by comparison. I let my grip on the deck plating loosen, ready to slip beneath the waves and join my crew. Then I felt the envelope. Captain Nakamura's confession, still tucked inside my jacket, somehow preserved despite days in the water. His final order echoed through my fading mind. Survive. That's an order. I tightened my grip on the floating debris. I would not die here. Not yet. Not until someone heard the truth. The fishing boat found me 6 hours later. Filipino fishermen who'd ventured far from shore, looking for tuna in deep waters. They pulled me aboard more dead than alive, gave me water I couldn't keep down, wrapped me in blankets that couldn't stop my shivering. I tried to speak, to explain, but my voice had been destroyed by days of salt water and screaming. They took me to their village, where an American medical officer from a nearby base examined me. "You're the first survivor we've found from that carrier group," he told me once I could understand English again. "Command thought everyone went down with the ships." "How many?" I managed to whisper. "How many survived?" His face told me before his words did. "Including you?" 9. 9 survivors from the entire battle group. 9. Out of more than 12,000 men spread across our carrier group. A 91% casualty rate, exactly as Tokyo had planned when they sent us with one-way fuel and no rescue contingency. The envelope was ruined, but I'd memorized every word of Captain Nakamura's confession during those days in the water. When I was strong enough, I wrote it all down again. The secret orders. The one-way fuel allocation. The deliberate sacrifice of thousands of men for a diversionary operation that accomplished nothing strategic. But the truth died there. American intelligence classified the documents. The Japanese government after the war had no interest in admitting they'd murdered their own sailors. Captain Nakamura's confession was buried in archives marked top secret, indefinite. For 80 years, I kept my promise of silence. I watched war documentaries that called Operation Tengo a heroic last stand. I read history books that praised the courageous sacrifice of Japan's carrier crews. I attended memorial ceremonies where politicians celebrated our noble deaths in defense of the homeland. And I said nothing. Because to speak would be to dishonor Captain Nakamura's memory, to shame the families of the men who died, to accomplish nothing except adding my confession to archives no one would ever read. But I'm 98 years old now. Everyone who could be hurt by this truth is dead. The politicians who gave those orders are dead. The officers who executed them are dead. Even the other 8 survivors are dead. I'm the last one left who knows what really happened. So now you know too. The secret World War II order that sent Japan's carrier crews to certain death. The 91% casualty rate that was never an accident but a calculated sacrifice. The truth that's been buried in classified archives for 8 decades. Those 12,000 men deserved better than to be murdered by their own commanders. The least I can do, before I join them, is make sure someone remembers why they never came home. Their deaths weren't heroic. They were criminal. And it's time the world knew the difference. The American medical officer, Captain Robert Hayes, sat across from me in the small hospital room 3 weeks after my rescue. My strength had returned enough to speak coherently, though my body still bore the marks of those days adrift, scars from burns, weight loss that would take months to regain, and nightmares that woke me screaming every night. Lieutenant Tanaka, I need to ask you some questions about the operation. Hayes pulled out a notepad, his expression professional but not unkind. We're trying to understand Japanese naval strategy during the final months of the war. Your testimony could be valuable. I stared at the ceiling, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, expose the murderous incompetence of Tokyo's high command, reveal how thousands of men had been deliberately sacrificed for nothing. But another part remembered Captain Nakamura's warning about family honor, about the consequences that would ripple through generations if the truth emerged. It was a combat operation, I said carefully. We engaged American forces. We lost. Hayes leaned forward. Lieutenant, our intelligence suggests something unusual about your fuel loads. Your carrier group couldn't have returned to port even if you'd survived the battle. That's not standard operational procedure. So they knew. Or suspected. The Americans had been analyzing our wreckage, our radio intercepts, our operational patterns. They'd done the mathematics that Tokyo had hoped would remain hidden forever. I cannot speak about classified operational details, I replied, falling back on military protocol. Even as a prisoner of war, I have obligations to my service. You're not a prisoner of war. Japan surrendered 2 weeks ago. Hayes's voice softened. The war is over, Lieutenant. Whatever happened out there, whatever orders you were following, it's finished now. But the families of those men deserve to know the truth about how their sons died. The surrender. I'd heard about it from the Filipino fishermen, but it hadn't seemed real until this moment. The Emperor had spoken on radio, something unprecedented in Japanese history. The divine voice acknowledging defeat. The war that was supposed to end in glorious victory or honorable extinction had simply stopped. 2 weeks, I whispered. We died for nothing, then. If we'd waited 2 more weeks. You couldn't have known. Hayes set down his notepad. But I think you know something about those orders. Something that explains why 12,000 men died in an operation that accomplished no strategic objective. I closed my eyes, seeing Captain Nakamura standing on his burning bridge, refusing to abandon ship. Seeing Kenji Sato's smile as he showed me photographs of his daughter. Seeing Daichi Kobayashi sharing his wife's rice cakes during night watch. Seeing the young sailor who died beside me in the water, crying for his mother. If I tell you, I said slowly, can you guarantee it stays classified? That it never reaches Japan, never becomes public record? Hayes considered this. I can't promise permanent classification. But I can ensure your testimony is marked restricted, available only to intelligence analysts and historians with appropriate clearance. It won't appear in newspapers or public records. It was as close to protection as I would get. And maybe, I thought, it was enough. Maybe having the truth preserved somewhere, even in secret archives, was better than letting it die with me. We were given one-way fuel allocations, I began, and once I started talking, I couldn't stop. The entire story poured out, the decoded orders, Captain Nakamura's anguish, the deliberate sacrifice, the 91% casualty rate that was never an accident. Hayes wrote it all down, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, he sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "My God. Your own command did this to you?" "Operational necessity," I replied bitterly. "That's what they called it. We were operational necessities that became expendable when the math changed." Hayes arranged for me to record formal testimony over the following week. Each session lasted 3 hours, during which I recounted every detail I could remember, the encryption codes used for the secret orders, the exact wording of Captain Nakamura's confession, the fuel calculations that proved we'd been sent to die, the names of officers who'd knowingly participated in the operation. Other survivors were found during this time. 2 more sailors pulled from remote islands where they'd washed ashore delirious and near death. Their stories corroborated mine, the one-way fuel, the absence of rescue operations, the systematic sacrifice of Japan's remaining carrier forces for a battle that accomplished nothing except drawing American attention away from Okinawa for 48 hours. 48 hours, one survivor, Petty Officer Masato Ito, said during a joint debriefing. 12,000 men bought them 48 hours. And Okinawa fell anyway. The American intelligence analysts were thorough and professional. They interviewed each survivor separately, then together, checking for inconsistencies or embellishments. But our stories aligned perfectly because we were telling the truth. The documentation I'd memorized from Captain Nakamura's confession matched the operational orders that American codebreakers had partially intercepted but never fully understood. This changes our understanding of Japanese command decisions in the final months of the war, Colonel William Bradford, the senior intelligence officer, told us during our final session. "We knew your Navy was desperate, but we didn't realize your own command was essentially committing suicide by proxy, sacrificing crews they knew couldn't be recovered." "It wasn't suicide," I corrected him. "Suicide implies choice. We were murdered. There's a difference." Bradford nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, your testimony will be preserved. It may never become public, but historians will eventually know what happened to you and your crew. That's something. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. 9 survivors out of 12,000 men, and the truth buried in classified archives that might not be opened for a century. The families back in Japan would be told their sons died heroically in battle, defending the homeland. They'd never know those sons had been deliberately sent to die in an operation designed to fail. The repatriation came in October 1945. 9 Japanese survivors loaded onto a transport ship heading back to a homeland we barely recognized. The Emperor had surrendered. American forces occupied Tokyo. Everything we'd been told to die protecting had already fallen. My parents met me at the dock in Yokohama. My mother collapsed when she saw me, overcome with joy that I'd survived when so many hadn't. My father stood rigid, his face carved from stone, too proud to cry but his eyes telling me everything about the months he'd spent believing I was dead. They told us the Shōkaku was lost with all hands, my father said that evening, after my mother had finally stopped holding me. "For 5 months, we mourned you. 5 months preparing for a funeral that would never have a body." I almost told him then. Almost explained that I shouldn't have survived, that I'd only lived because I'd been lucky enough to be watching when wrong story, when the operation went exactly as Tokyo had planned. But I saw the pride in his eyes, the relief that his son had been one of the few who'd made it home, and I couldn't destroy that with the truth. "I was lucky, Father. Nothing more than luck." He nodded, accepting the lie because it was easier than confronting the alternative. And so began my decades of silence, carrying the truth like a stone in my chest while Japan rebuilt itself on a foundation of convenient myths about wartime honor and noble sacrifice. The other survivors and I made a pact. We would wait until everyone involved was dead, the admirals who gave the orders, the politicians who demanded the sacrifice, the families who needed to believe their loved ones died heroically. Only then would we consider speaking. Now I'm the last one left. The statute of limitations on truth has finally expired.